I'd like to talk a little bit about the science of innovation and the science of success. I've always been interested in what makes some people and some companies so much more successful than others. Recently, I went and I took a look at the Fortune 500. I wanted to see what was it about those top companies. And I found out something that surprised me. When I looked at revenue, I found out that 75% of the total revenue from the Fortune 500 comes from only 140 companies, less than a third. I had no idea that such a small number of people or companies dominated. I wondered if this was just special to corporations, and so I went and looked in other areas. I went to look for intellectual property, for patents, right? That's key to innovation. In 2011, 70% of the patents issued went to only 30% of the companies. Once again, just a small number of companies dominating success. And then I went and looked at something a little bit closer to home, scientific discovery. 50% of all scientific contribution comes from only 10% of researchers. Once again, a small number of people, a small number of companies dominating. I had no idea that success was so skewed. And I wondered why. Why was it that some people and some companies were just so much more successful? And I started to think, a little voice in the back of my head started to talk to me and said, David, maybe it's just because they're better than you. Maybe they're smarter than you. Maybe they're more talented. Have you ever thought this? I know I have. I've always thought that maybe they're just more successful because they just have something that I don't. But when I went back and looked at the Fortune 500, I noticed something that suggested that that's not correct. I noticed that every year the Fortune 500 changes. If you look over the span of a decade, 40% of the companies in the Fortune 500 change. It's not the same people that are successful each year. If it was just about being the smartest or the most talented, those people would stay on top year in, year out. But it's not. Every year, those elite of highly successful change. In fact, if you go back to the early 2000s and you look for a company, small company in Cupertino, California, they're not at the top of the list, but they are now. So how is it that success is so skewed, that there's such a maldistribution of success? And more importantly, how do we get to be at the top and stay at the top? I went looking for some explanation, and it turns out science actually has an answer for us. It's something called a power law. And the power law explains both how such a small number of people can dominate, and also why it's not the same number of people every year. There's been several models proposed for what causes the power law, and there's one I'd like to share with you because I think it gives a lot of insight into success and into innovation. And this model shows us that this maldistribution of success comes from two parts. The competition of two different forces. The first is the rate of growth of value. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, every year we're working with our companies to increase the revenue, to increase the profit. Heck, I don't know about you, but every year I just want to earn more money. Standard practice for us is to try to grow the value of our lives and of our companies. But what's the second piece? The second piece is what I really didn't know about, and it's what creates this skewness of this highly selected, successful few. And that second piece is obsolescence. Now, what do I mean by obsolescence? In 2011, Pfizer owned the world's #1 prescribed drug in the world, Lipitor. They sold $9.2 billion. In 2012, Lipitor came off patent. Sales plummeted to $3.5 billion, a 60% reduction in 1 year. That's obsolescence. The power law tells us that it's the constant competition between trying to increase value and obsolescence that creates this maldistribution of success. I've got a daughter at home, Julia. She's 3, she's about yay high. And every time we go to the beach, she always wants to build a sandcastle, and she's always digging a moat, or actually it's just a hole in front of the castle. And she always says, Daddy, will you go get me some water? And so Dad lugs down to the beach, pulls up a bucket of water, comes back and pours it into the hole. What happens to that water? It slowly drops out, right? So Dad takes the bucket, he goes back down to the beach, he picks up another bucket full, he comes back, he pours it in the hole. Constantly trying to add value, and obsolescence constantly sucking it out. And if you've ever built a sandcastle at high tide, as the water goes out, the sand starts to dry up. And that water pours out of that hole faster and faster until Dad can't even get down to the beach and back to keep it full. The key to becoming and staying one of those highly successful, the key to the power law is to continually generate new value while at the same time fighting off obsolescence. The key is to innovate. I'm sure many of you have thought about innovation as generating new value, but you probably didn't think about it as fighting off obsolescence. I hope today you'll see how innovation both generates new value and fights off the obsolescence so that you and your company can stay one of those highly successful people.